track Helen down and but what I'll start with my side. So firstly, we're joined here today for the Growth Roundtable. It's all about creating and understanding the challenges that are faced as you go from startup to scale up and that roadmap to success. We've got a fantastic panel here joining us. So yeah, please wave everybody to say hi to everyone from your
Hi.
So yeah, I think Helen's having an issue jumping in. So hopefully one of my team will call her shortly. So Empact Ventures has a significant experience in working with tech startups at various stages of growth. And it's clear that they will rarely experience challenges in a linear or localized fashion, but rather circle through these challenges several times as they scale. For us, we've always categorized these challenges into development challenges. So everything that you need to set up or restructure to grow, growth challenges. So securing partners, doing marketing, closing sales, growing the team through recruitment, and sustainability, getting ready to fundraise, getting the right pitch deck in place, the right sources of finance. And in early 2020, we launched a tech startup report that Hays led in partnership with us called Finding the Stars to Guide You Forward. And that found that 51% of tech startups and scale-ups believe that securing funding through investment was their most pressing challenge, followed by sales and building a customer base with 50%, and then 38% with marketing and raising company profile. So we've got a fantastic panel of judges here, and I'm just going to start by asking V a question about product development. I mean, V, you work in the National Institute for Health Research with medtech startups in the early stages of their product development to prepare and support them to achieve patient outcomes. What are the most common challenges that you see these companies facing, and what do you advise them to do to address that? No, I think we lost V, so hopefully she'll rejoin us. Let's move on to Ibrahim. Ibrahim, you've been building a rockstar team with Hays, with support from Hays Rise. How do you ensure that you're building the right team that fits into your startup culture, particularly with people that get it as joining a startup and as a tech for good company, like getting a real sense of purpose to change the world?
So I think, Costa, I think the kind of key part is finding people who get it, essentially. And I think often enough that's easier said than done. As an educational technology company, we've been very fortunate enough to attract people who really are passionate about education as well as technology and making a difference and kind of closing that kind of learning gap. But often enough, when people join an early stage startup, they don't really comprehend the challenges and the difficulties that lie ahead, as compelling as the vision and the mission may be. But I think as a company and the team that we have around us so far, we're very fortunate to have extremely dedicated and committed individuals who have been with us from the very early days. We've only been around for 2 years, but we have dealt with a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles together, and I think 2020 has been quite a bit of a challenge from the outset, but I think we're one of the fortunate startups to have a team which has kind of stood by us. We've got a product out and we've achieved a tremendous amount, and I think Hays has played quite a big part as well from the point we started speaking to Hays in early summer at some point. I think one of the things that really made Hays stand out for us was the fact they took time to understand us as a business and our mission and our values. Often enough, when you go to recruiters, you kind of get thrown candidates and individuals who may not really meet the company's mission and values, but may be able to do the job. But with Hays, we managed to get a really filtered recruitment process and candidates which were passionate about what we were in the direction we were going in, but also really wanted to make a difference in education and building a really cool technology which would make children's life easier, as well as making us into a successful company in the coming years.
Great, thanks so much. And we've got V back now. So V, I'll ask you a question again. What are the most common challenges that you see the medtech startups that you work with face in the product development stage, and what do you advise them to do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm V. I'm the program manager for the NHR Search for Medtech Cooperative. So with my booth later on. But basically, in terms of challenges, I mean, the most common one that most companies will probably cite is funding. And I think in the UK now, funding environments just set up slightly differently to, example, the United States. They can have early stage swimming in terms of late phase. So it's just getting that initial hurdle is actually very difficult for a lot of medtech companies. But what we do understand, that's the main thing. I think one of the key things that we see from an NHS perspective, because there are a couple of comments about selling NHS, and I think in the previous session, one of your speakers mentioned about these technologies that are presented to the NHS that do not fill an unmet need. And that is still a huge problem that we see, where people come with innovation, completed them, but there's no unmet needs. There's been no discussion of what's the reimbursement. There's been no discussion about it to be used within clinic, what technology is it replacing, what standard of care is it replacing, and all of those things impact on your ability to sell into the NHS. And that's what our organization discussions really early on, so that you don't waste a lot of time trying to go to every single NHS organization with things. So I think validating the unmet need, how that technology is going to be used in clinical practice is actually more important than finding the funding, because once you understand that and you've got the buy-in from the clinical side, we really see companies finding it easier to get funding once they've got established, because from the investor perspective and from a funder perspective, then there is more confidence in terms of, if this thing actually works, there's people on the other end who are willing to move heaven and earth to get this technology in. So technologies do go into the NHS, but I think not a lot of people understand what that process is and how you can increase your chances. And it's also about, generating, the evidence. What we also see is, because companies have already developed or gone somewhere to developing these technologies, there's some companies that are much to just get out there, but the NHS and organizations like NICE, they rely on clinical evidence of some sort, and that is required, and they want you to ask the right questions, they want the right methodology to have been used. HR basically has all those resources to help you answer those questions, but unfortunately, not many people know, where to find us, because the NHR has loads of front doors. So it's about finding the right front. You can't use the will to live if you can do the wrong door, because by the time you get to people like me, you might be thinking, I don't think. But I think it's just about knowing where to go. But I'd probably say the top two things is having a technology that the NHS actually wants and can see the value of in terms of cost effectiveness and cost benefit, and being able to access funding. And organizations like ours are able to support companies with grant funding applications, for example, to help them leverage that funding that they desperately need to just get over the first valley of death, as we call it.
I think you're right there, V, and I think that's one of the reasons that we've come together to do a virtual MedTech Summit in January to educate people on that and to get more people coming up with solutions to address those unmet needs that we often speak about together. So thanks very much for your insights. Let's move on to Matt. So in terms of growth challenges now, marketing, raising company profile, generating leads. You see that a lot, obviously, running Top Business Tech as our media partner and interviewing a lot of the tech startups and scale-ups. What are the main kind of marketing challenges that you find when interviewing them? And given your experience, what do you advise?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's something that we see a lot with the startup industry, where usually startups are so product-led, marketing is sort of just shoved to the side a little bit, and it's not really focused on. It's just like that sort of afterthought. How the most common challenges you do see is budget. First of all, obviously being a small company, you've got to really start thinking, how can you market effectively with very minimal capital to do so? But this lack of budget usually then causes startups to, I mean, you might have one or two people in the marketing team, if that. It might even be the founder doing a bit of marketing on the side just to try and build an audience. But because of that, we're trying to do too much at the same time. So you're spreading your time and skills way too thinly on things that just aren't working effectively. So it's sacrificing on the quality of content you're producing. So you might produce a blog, but it's just a blog that anyone else can produce, and it's got no depth to it. It's got no real sort of coherence that's really going to affect your brand. And this diluted multi-channel experience just isn't effective. So corporates have the luxury of playing around with all these different channels and the luxury of getting it wrong, but startups don't. You have to be very careful with what they're doing marketing-wise. So trying to focus on what works is really important for startups. So define a very specific niche of audience and target that audience. Don't try and target loads of different personas and characters, because you're going to spend so much time trying to figure out all the different personality types and the buying behavior, the psychology behind it all. If you focus on one particular type, I feel you're going to have a lot more benefit there. And don't use things like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of them at the same time. Focus on that's actually going to get the audience you need. So because it's all about just focusing and understanding where your very specific audience, the ones that are going to convert, that are highly likely to convert. Again, yeah. And then, as you say in the Hays report, it's one of the biggest challenges. The positioning your brand as well is a big challenge. A big challenge I see a lot of businesses face, a lot of startups. They're not thinking about the copy, the visuals, the aesthetics. I mean, 70% of people make first impression based off aesthetics alone. So if your brand doesn't look like a modern thinking, amazing brand from the future or something like that, it can impact on the adoption on social communities.
I think some very good points there, Matt. We're going to have to move on, but I'd like to say, Helen, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry we've had problems with the technology. We're in a technical.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you for joining us so much. And I'll ask you the question that I've been thinking of, which is, like, you've got a lot of experience with North Invest. We've just had Penny involved in the Tech for Good session.
Yes.
Given the theme of the event, what does the impact investment landscape look like in the UK, and how does it differ from traditional funding channels?
Yeah, so it's a super exciting space at the moment. I think you've only to look at the Bohos report from 2019 to see that it's growing, and it's growing quickly. I think it was at a peak last year of larger deals of 51, and they were valued at something like 84 million. We're seeing in North Invest an increasing number of applications from Tech for Good startups. We're in the very early stage funding arena. We're a not-for-profit, and we operate across the whole of the Northern Powerhouse geography. But for instance, when we looked at this year's data, we can see that something like 48% of all the applications that are being made to us are from something that most people would recognise as a Tech for Good solution. We are particularly seeing lots coming through in the sort of medtech area, with something like 44% of all of our applications from medtech. And we are able to support those startups because we have a very well-formed syndicate in that area of people who can help sort of route to market type advice. We can provide them with funding. We're very good at supporting them, NEDs and advisors as well, and general ecosystem support. So that's what we're seeing. We know that COVID is having an impact on the Tech for Good investment arena. I think it's having a slightly higher impact in this area than possibly in more traditional areas. And again, the Bohos report backs that up, saying that it has dropped off to being down 37% year on year versus down 25% for the whole market. But I see this being a sector that is only going to continue to grow when you consider the fact that sort of wealth is shifting very much to millennials, and we know that they are much more interested in this space than a more traditional investment market. So again, the research that we quite often quote is that 77% of younger investors in particular are interested in this space versus 44% of older investors. So it's definitely one to watch. We are sort of building out our capability around measuring impact in a meaningful way for our investors. So both transparency in terms of using the traditional measurement scores, either the IMP score or ESG point systems, are very useful in this space. And I can see particularly investors in the angel arena being more and more engaged, because typically they are looking for a more philanthropic approach rather than a straight ROI.
That's very interesting. And Heidi, you've got a lot of experience in this area as well. Like, what do you see the key challenges are, and what advice do you give?
Okay, I'm Heidi Core, and I'm from Dublin Business Innovation Centre, obviously in Ireland, and we empower startups, scale-ups, and we help them through preparing them for investor ready. And obviously we then access funding. We also manage the Halo Business Angel Network, which I think last year invested 16 million, not as high figures as you could sell, Helen, but Ireland's a lot smaller. That's 16.8 million leveraged a further 36 million. We also run the Guinness Enterprise Centre, which then houses the entrepreneurs, and we work a lot with corporates to encourage entrepreneurship. So we see a wide spectrum, and the biggest probably challenges are, and I think Matthew and V, and I think you touched on it in the beginning, you said 51% have investment challenges and 50% have sales challenges, and the two are very interlinked. And it comes back to a point that V actually highlighted as well. It's if in today's environment, your value proposition always had to be strong. Today, though, where everybody is firefighting and doesn't have the time to kind of want to engage with you, even less, your value proposition has to be razor sharp, which that means if you're not addressing that particular problem and you're not viewing that problem from inside or wearing the shoes of the person that is experiencing that problem, you are not going to get their attention. Everybody is way too busy. It also means, and Matthew alluded to it, it also means if you don't know your razor sharp value proposition, how can you market to the personas of your target audience? So they're all crucial elements of, and it comes back to, and I think one of the ladies, I think from TAP SOS mentioned it very early on, they worked with the end users at the very beginning of their product development. And I really do feel that is so crucial to do, as well as then understanding the sales process, whether it be the national NHS, whether it be HSE in Ireland, or if you're dealing with government or you're dealing with corporate, you have to understand how they buy these products. Are they in contract? Who makes the decisions? Because quite often we find people will spend a lot of time with the people actually that don't make the decisions, and they don't find out till sort of 6 months down the line, and they've wasted that time and energy, whether it's evaluating the product, and at the end of the day they don't have those decisions to make. So really crucial to understand how the buy-in process actually works to help give you timelines, because if you can't see a revenue being generated quite early on, that puts you into investment challenges and the desire and the need that you think you need more money. But really what it actually comes back to is you have to understand where your lowest hanging fruit is what we always say, and where you're going to make that early revenue to validate what it is that you're actually doing.
Fantastic. Well, what I want to do now for the last 10 minutes is we've got quite a few questions from the audience. So I'll start by there. So I've got one from Becky Lodge, who says, any tips the panel would like to share with our community of early stage startups, startup disruptors? One question we get asked a lot is, are corporates only interested in working with CICs and not-for-profits, or will they back profit-making companies that want to do good too? Does it depend on the corporate and their CSR policy? Does somebody want to take that?
So I would say that there's plenty of opportunity for for-profit organisations as well as those that are in the not-for-profit space. We typically work in a sort of co-innovation arrangement with larger organisations like Arup and their ventures team there, who are interested in bringing some of the disruptive tech that we see coming through the network. So I would say there's plenty of opportunities. It's the most important thing clearly is the proposition itself, and that's what's going to get the hook. I think the rest of the conversation can be nuanced by whether you're a not-for-profit or a for-profit, but the most important thing is the solution.
Excellent. And has any of the panel, probably Helen and Heidi, have you seen a change in the funding landscape as a consequence of COVID? That comes from Ian Thompson.
Crisis always drives creativity, and the creativity then also in the current crisis also means just to re-emphasize what I was saying, it's understanding what value this product or this proposition is, how it's going to impact, because I'm firefighting, it has to be least disrupting to the current way that I'm working, and I have to see and understand very quickly. From the investment side, we haven't really here seen too much interest wavering, but what we have seen is some of the terms have been changing a little bit. So if you haven't got that early validation, then the terms of investment may be affected slightly. Helen, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but
yeah. So giving you a statistically based answer, we've actually seen a big pickup in the number of investments that we've achieved this year. So last year we closed 10 rounds, and this year we've already closed 15. We'll probably close 20 by the end. That's because it's easier to mobilize angel networks at this time in a virtual environment across bigger geographies. We've seen a pickup in investment appetite. In terms of applications, we've seen a small drop-off of around 15% from entrepreneurs, which is maybe COVID-related compared to the previous run rates. But I would say if you are a startup looking for investment, now is actually a very good time.
And there was a question that came through on the previous panel that we didn't get to, so I'm going to ask it to V. So it said, it was from Harry Michael, and said, given the NHS is made up of a group of trusts, selling into the NHS is quite an ignorant business strategy for a medtech startup. How would you recommend a medtech company goes about getting a wider footprint within the NHS network around the UK, given trusts run semi-autonomously with their own budgets for purchase products?
Yeah, so that's a bit of a long story, but I'll try to summarize it. It's not just on paper. It doesn't mean you can just go to a central place and say, here's my technology, can you buy it? As I mentioned before, first of all, that technology has got to be meeting an unmet need. There's got to have been health economic studies done on it. There's got to have been cost effectiveness, cost benefit work done on that. And depending on the technology, you've got different rules for reimbursement. So for some technologies, it's the clinical commissioning groups or the CCGs that you've got to engage. You've got to get them on board to be able to get that technology. And for those that aren't familiar with the clinical commissioning groups, they basically look after primary care, but they also pay secondary care hospitals to conduct certain procedures. So the money that most hospitals get to undertake certain surgery comes from the clinical commissioning groups. It's actually not the hospital deciding we've got enough money to conduct 100 operations this year. They have to get permission from these groups. So depending on your technology, it has to go that route. Some technologies need to go down the route, so you need to get through the whole tech evaluation process and have them review it and have them have their panels. What is able to do is recommend a particular technology for use in the NHS, which basically gives every single trust permission to look at their budgets and see whether they want to buy this or not. You've got other routes are slightly easier. You can go directly to procurement for a particular trust and basically hope that trust sings the praises of your particular institution, which will attract us to start looking at it and thinking, well, maybe we should have this thing. And you also have organizations, academic health science networks, and their remit is specifically to facilitate, very quick adoption of technologies into the NHS. So there's different bodies that enable the adoption of technology into the NHS, but it's really dependent on the type of technology. And having the discussions really early on when you're doing the project will actually have along the pathway that leads you to the people who make the decisions. So a point was raised earlier about people having conversations with the people who don't make the decisions and then waste a lot of time. We're here to highlight the key decision makers for your particular technology based on what you say is going to use. The misconception is, well, my product, it costs £80 and the NHS is currently spending £10,000. Why is everybody bothering about this? But the way the NHS costs its procedures is very different to how you're going to cost it for selling it to somebody else or a private healthcare provider. So they cost their procedures from the time a patient's admitted or diagnosed with a certain condition to the time they are released off your books. And all those costs have got to be taken into account. So if your technology then comes in and disrupts an earlier part of the pathway or leads to loads of people flooding GPs for something, then the NHS is going to think, well, actually, no, it's causing more problems than it's worth. And one example of this is one of the bowel cancer tests where I think an app or something was made for people to self-evaluate themselves. And what resulted in was everybody going to the GP practice saying, I think I've got bowel cancer. And obviously the GPs don't want to have somebody on this, and possibly no, it's not. And then that results in loads of people going to secondary care for colonoscopy, very expensive procedures. And actually there are risks associated with that procedure. And this is what the Department of Health through the NIHR is trying to prevent, is people need to understand the knock-on effects that technology has, what enables adoption to take place in the NHS. But I can't stress the importance of having a clinical champion early enough. If people can see the value, they can see where it fits within the pathway, they will literally bite your hand off to get that technology in. And that's the way it works. Coming with a finished product is basically riding a horse backwards as far as I'm concerned, because now you've got to go back to the beginning of things for people to believe the claims that you're making about your technology.
Well, thanks so much for your long answer. It really did help. I'm sorry we didn't get to Ibrahim and Matt too much, but thank you for joining us today, guys and ladies. And we're going to head over to the main stage now, where we're going to announce the results. So you'll hear from V as well, who's one of our industry judges, and we'll announce the national winner before going over to the exhibition. So thank you very much, everyone. And I will see you
very much
on the main stage.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.